The wheels of the wheelchair made a grating sound on the cobbled path of Boston Memorial Hospital. Valentina Blackwell, in her impeccable business suit, stood helpless as Sophia's wheelchair got stuck between two pavement stones. The 8-year-old girl's vacant eyes reflected the overcast sky above. "We've tried everything," the doctor had whispered to Valentina that morning. "The spinal injury is too severe." Just as rain began to fall, a tall figure suddenly appeared behind them. A man with slightly long hair, wearing a simple t-shirt under a worn jacket, with a little girl clutching his hand firmly. "Let me help her," he said, his voice deep and resolute. When Valentina looked up, she had no idea that this encounter would change everything. Valentina Blackwell had never imagined herself as the CEO of a medical innovation empire. With her Harvard MBA and background in finance, she had planned to conquer Wall Street, not walk the sterile corridors of Blackwell Medical Innovations. But life had other plans. When her father, the renowned neurologist Dr. Lawrence Blackwell, died suddenly in a laboratory accident 3 years ago, the board had turned to her, the pragmatic financial director with her father's determined eyes but none of his medical expertise. At 35, she became one of the youngest female CEOs in the medical technology industry, carrying the weight of her father's legacy on shoulders that appeared stronger than they sometimes felt. Beneath her polished exterior and confident stride through the company's glass headquarters, Valentina harbored a deep-seated fear that she would never truly understand her father's work, the brilliant medical mind that had saved countless lives through his groundbreaking neural regeneration research. That fear had remained manageable, compartmentalized into the private chambers of her heart, until 2 months ago, when her daughter Sophia's life changed forever. The car accident had been swift and merciless, leaving the vibrant 8-year-old with a severe spinal cord injury that paralyzed her from the waist down. Suddenly, the medical world that Valentina had navigated from a comfortable distance became intensely personal. She had exhausted her resources flying in specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and even a neural regeneration expert from Tokyo. But their prognoses remained cautiously pessimistic. With intensive therapy, she might regain some function, they would say, their carefully chosen words revealing the limitations they weren't voicing directly. Each night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Valentina would sit beside her bed, studying the medical reports with the same intensity she once applied to financial statements, searching for a solution that seemed increasingly elusive. Griffin Hayes walked through life with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen both triumph and tragedy. At 39, his slightly long hair showed the first threads of gray, earned through years of 16-hour shifts in neurosurgery residency, and later, through sleepless nights caring for his dying wife, and then raising their daughter alone. Once the star pupil of Dr. Lawrence Blackwell and the youngest neurosurgeon ever granted attending privileges at Massachusetts General Hospital, Griffin had been destined for medical greatness. His hands possessed that rare combination of surgical precision and intuitive healing that made other doctors step back in awe. But 3 years ago, those same hands had failed to save the person who mattered most to him, his wife Emily, whose aggressive cancer had progressed despite his desperate attempts with experimental treatments. After her death, the whispers and accusations from her family had driven him away from Boston's prestigious medical circles. He had retreated to Portland, taking his 6-year-old daughter Lily with him, choosing to work in a small rehabilitation clinic where patients' grateful smiles provided more healing than any professional accolade ever could. The little girl had inherited his medical intuition, showing a remarkable ability to connect with patients that sometimes surpassed even trained professionals. Lily had developed her own medical practice at home, treating a growing collection of stuffed animals for increasingly elaborate conditions. When Griffin read about the Blackwell CEO's daughter suffering a spinal injury in a medical journal, something stirred in him, a memory of research notebooks Dr. Blackwell had entrusted to him before his death, filled with unfinished work on neural regeneration that might hold the key to helping this child. The first time Valentina saw Griffin Hayes standing in her daughter's hospital room, her instinct was to call security. His worn clothing and slightly disheveled appearance hardly matched the pristine credentials of the specialists she had flown in from Switzerland and Japan. "I don't know who you are," she said coolly, positioning herself between the stranger and Sophia's bed. Griffin held up his hands in a gesture of peace, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to her bristling suspicion. "I'm Dr. Griffin Hayes," he said. "I was your father's student and research partner for 7 years at Mass General." Something in his voice, a quiet authority mixed with genuine respect, made Valentina pause, searching his face for any resemblance to the researcher she remembered from her father's lab. His name sounded vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place it in the constellation of scientists who had orbited her father's brilliant career. Griffin explained that he had read about Sophia's case in a medical journal and recognized her as Dr. Blackwell's granddaughter. "Your father entrusted me with his final research on spinal cord regeneration before he died. I believe it could help Sophia." His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about, yet Valentina's walls remained firmly in place. "And what makes you think you can succeed where Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic have failed?" she asked, her voice carrying the edge that had made board members and business rivals alike retreat in meetings. The protective maternal instinct that had been heightened since the accident made her particularly wary of this unannounced visitor, regardless of how he had managed to get past hospital security. Before Griffin could answer, little Lily stepped forward from behind her father's legs, clutching a worn teddy bear and a toy stethoscope. With the innocent boldness only children possess, she walked straight to Sophia's bedside. "Hi, I'm Lily. Can I check your bear? He looks like he needs a doctor." Sophia, who had barely spoken to the child psychologist Valentina had hired, looked at the little girl with surprise. Something in Lily's matter-of-fact approach broke through Sophia's shell. She nodded slightly, offering her stuffed rabbit to Lily's expert examination. "His name is Hopper," Sophia said softly, the first voluntary information she had offered anyone in days. Valentina felt her breath catch at this small but significant breakthrough, her eyes moving from her daughter to Griffin, who was watching the interaction with a knowing smile. "Call session," she finally said. "You can try one session with my daughter, but I'll be present the entire time, and at the first sign of distress, we stop." The following days established a rhythm that gradually became the highlight of Sophia's recovery. Griffin would arrive with Lily and his medical bag, which contained both sophisticated neural stimulation equipment and colorful bandages for the girl's stuffed animals. He approached Sophia's treatment with a blend of scientific rigor and playful creativity that was unlike anything Valentina had observed in other specialists. Where they had been formal and technical, Griffin was warm and engaging. Where they had focused exclusively on Sophia's physical condition, he treated her as a whole person whose emotional state was integral to her healing. The most remarkable aspect of his approach was how he incorporated Lily into the treatment sessions. While Griffin worked with Sophia on physical exercises, Lily would engage her in elaborate make-believe games that just happened to require Sophia to focus on different muscle groups. "Dr. Lily needs a special assistant to hold this very important flashlight," she would announce, positioning Sophia's arm in exactly the way Griffin had been trying to encourage. The natural way Lily interacted with Sophia, without the awkwardness or pity that even well-meaning adults often displayed, created an environment where therapy became play and medical progress became a shared adventure. Valentina, who initially planned to monitor every session with hawk-like vigilance, found herself gradually retreating to the corner of the room, watching in amazement as her daughter responded to this unorthodox team. There was something almost magical about seeing Sophia laugh again, even if she was still confined to her wheelchair. The little girl who had been withdrawn and silent was now looking forward to each day's adventure with Dr. Lily and Dr. Griffin. Griffin's methods were unlike anything the other specialists had tried. He combined cutting-edge neurostimulation with simple childhood games, explaining that the neural pathways formed during play were often stronger than those created during deliberate exercise. "The brain doesn't distinguish between therapy and fun," he told Valentina one afternoon, as they watched the girls playing doctor with a row of stuffed animals. "It only knows engagement and disengagement." Lawrence understood that. Each time he mentioned her father, Valentina felt a complex emotion rise within her, curiosity mixed with the grief she had never fully processed. She found herself lingering after sessions, asking questions not just about Sophia's treatment, but about Griffin's work with her father. Despite her initial skepticism, Valentina couldn't ignore the small but significant improvements in Sophia's condition. The daily physical assessments were showing increased sensation in her lower extremities, and her overall mood had transformed from resigned depression to cautious hope. One afternoon, as Griffin was demonstrating a new exercise designed to strengthen the neural pathways to Sophia's feet, something remarkable happened. Sophia suddenly gasped, her eyes widening with wonder. "I felt that," she exclaimed, looking down at her foot in disbelief. "I felt my toe move." Valentina rushed to her daughter's side, watching in astonishment as Sophia concentrated intently, managing to produce a slight but unmistakable movement of her big toe. It was a tiny motion that represented an enormous victory, the first voluntary movement below her injury site since the accident. Tears welled in Valentina's eyes as she looked up at Griffin, who was maintaining his professional composure despite the breakthrough, though she could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "The neural pathways are starting to reconnect," as Sophia excitedly showed Lily her moving toe, with the younger girl clapping and cheering as if Sophia had just won an Olympic medal. Griffin placed a gentle hand on Valentina's shoulder, a brief, compassionate touch that acknowledged the magnitude of the moment without intruding on it. It was the first time Valentina had allowed herself to truly hope since the accident, and the first time she realized how deeply she had come to trust this unconventional doctor, with his worn jacket and brilliant mind. The boardroom of Blackwell Medical Innovations had witnessed countless high-stakes meetings, but the tension in the air that morning was unprecedented. Reed Hamilton, the company's research director who had stepped into the scientific leadership role after Lawrence's death, stood before a projection screen displaying medical records and newspaper clippings. "I felt obligated to bring this to your attention, Valentina," he said, his voice carrying the practiced concern of corporate politics. "Dr. Hayes was involved in a serious medical investigation 3 years ago. The document showed a malpractice suit filed against Griffin, alleging that he had used experimental treatments resulting in a patient's death. News clippings with sensational headlines like, 'Renowned surgeon's experimental treatment ends in tragedy,' were displayed alongside court documents. The case was settled out of court, and shortly after, he disappeared from the Boston medical community." Reed's voice carried a note of triumph, as though he'd uncovered a dangerous fraud. "I'm concerned about the liability to Blackwell if we continue allowing him to treat Sophia with what are likely similar experimental methods." Valentina stared at the evidence, feeling as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. But both times, after weeks of growing trust, of watching her daughter improve under Griffin's care, this revelation felt like a personal betrayal. "Who was the patient?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Reed hesitated before answering. "His wife, Emily Hayes. She was suffering from terminal cancer." Something cold settled in Valentina's chest. The revelation that Griffin had used experimental treatments on his own wife and lost her cast his dedication to medicine in a completely different light. Was he driven by genuine healing, or by a desperate need to redeem that loss through Sophia? Throughout the day, the question haunted her, making it impossible to focus on her regular CEO duties. That evening, she waited until Sophia was asleep before confronting Griffin at her home. She placed the file on the coffee table between them, watching his face as recognition dawned, followed by a profound sadness that made him suddenly look much older than his 39 years. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Valentina asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Griffin looked at the file, then back at her. "Yes," he said simply. "When I felt you were ready to hear it?" The quiet dignity in his voice only fueled her anger. "Ready? You're treating my daughter with experimental methods, and you didn't think I needed to know? You were investigated for a patient's death." Griffin didn't flinch at her words, though she could see the pain they caused. "Emily was dying," he said softly. "Stage 4 glioblastoma. The conventional treatments had failed, and she volunteered for an experimental protocol based on your father's research." His voice grew steadier as he continued. "She knew the risks. We both did. But her family couldn't accept that when she died. They needed someone to blame." He looked directly into Valentina's eyes. "Your father stood by me. He testified that the treatment was sound, that Emily's death was due to the progression of her disease, not my care. The case was dismissed, but by then, the damage to my reputation was done." Despite understanding Griffin's explanation, Valentina couldn't fully shake the feeling that something fundamental had been broken in their developing trust. The next morning, she made a phone call to a renowned clinic in Zurich that specialized in experimental spinal treatments. The Swiss clinic represented everything Griffin's approach was not: institutional, methodical, extensively documented. Their treatments had been published in peer-reviewed journals and approved by multiple ethics committees. They lacked the personal touch and intuitive brilliance she had witnessed in Griffin's sessions with Sophia, but they also lacked the shadow of past tragedy and the risk of untested methods. Within days, arrangements were made for Sophia to be transferred to Switzerland for an intensive 3-month program. When Griffin arrived for their scheduled session and learned of the decision, his professional demeanor cracked for the first time. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and urgent as they spoke in the hallway outside Sophia's room. "Sophia is responding to our treatment. Neural regeneration isn't like flipping a switch. It's a slow, delicate process. Interrupting it now could set her back significantly." His eyes held an intensity that reminded Valentina of her father in his most passionate moments of medical advocacy. "The stimulation protocols we've established are creating new neural pathways. If you disrupt that process now, those pathways may not reconnect in the same way." Valentina stood firm, armored in the certainty that came from taking decisive action. The Zurich clinic has state-of-the-art facilities and documented success rates. Their approach is proven. What she didn't say was that their approach was also safer, more conventional, less dependent on the vision and skill of one man who might disappear as suddenly as he had appeared. Griffin seemed about to argue further, then stopped himself, nodding slowly as though coming to terms with a difficult truth. "I understand. You're doing what you think is best for Sophia." The resignation in his voice made Valentina question her decision for a moment, but she pushed the doubt away. Griffin knelt down to say goodbye to Sophia, explaining in gentle terms that she would be going on a special trip to help her legs get stronger. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she realized what his words meant. "But what about Lily? What about our hospital?" she asked, referring to the elaborate pretend medical practice the two girls had established for their stuffed animals. Griffin promised that Lily would find a way to stay in touch and that they would keep their stuffed animal patients safe until she returned. As a parting gift, Lily solemnly handed over her favorite teddy bear, Dr. Waffles, for Sophia to take to Switzerland. "He's the best at making people feel better," she explained seriously, demonstrating how to listen to the bear's heartbeat with her toy stethoscope. "And he knows all about medicine, so he can tell the doctors in Switzerland how to help you." The innocent confidence in Lily's voice nearly broke Valentina's resolve. That night, Griffin returned to his hotel room with Lily, preparing to return to Portland the following day. But instead of packing, he spread Lawrence Blackwell's research notebooks across the desk and began studying them with renewed intensity, searching for something he might have missed, some insight that might have convinced Valentina to continue his treatment if only he had articulated it clearly enough. The day of departure arrived with the efficiency that characterized all of Valentina's plans. The private jet was fueled and waiting, the medical transport team was on standby, and Sophia's bags were packed with everything she would need for 3 months at the Swiss clinic. What Valentina hadn't planned for was her daughter's complete emotional shutdown as they approached the boarding gate. Sophia clutched Lily's teddy bear to her chest and refused to move from her wheelchair. "I don't want to go," she said, her voice small but determined. "I want to stay with Dr. Griffin and Lily." The medical transport team exchanged uncomfortable glances. Clearly experienced with reluctant patients but unsure how to handle a situation where the parent was also their employer's CEO. Valentina knelt beside her daughter, using the gentle but firm tone that usually worked when Sophia was being difficult. "Sweetheart, the doctors in Switzerland have special equipment that can help you walk again. Don't you want that?" Sophia's answer was heartbreakingly simple. "Dr. Griffin is already helping me walk. I moved my toes yesterday." And Lily said, "I'll move my foot next." The childish logic carried an undeniable truth that made Valentina's carefully constructed decision suddenly seem cold and clinical in comparison. Her daughter wasn't a medical case to be transferred to the facility with the best statistical outcomes. She was a little girl who had formed a healing connection with another little girl and her father. Valentina felt a tightness in her chest as she realized how deeply Griffin and Lily had become integrated into Sophia's recovery, not just physically, but emotionally. As she tried once more to convince her daughter to board, a flight attendant approached with a small package that had just been delivered for Sophia. Inside was a child's drawing, clearly made by Lily, showing two little girls holding hands, both standing upright, with big smiles on their faces. In the corner was Lily's small red handprint, a childish but meaningful promise. The simple illustration captured what all the medical reports and treatment plans had missed: the human element of healing, the power of friendship and hope in recovery. Also in the package was a note addressed to Valentina, written in Griffin's precise handwriting. In Lawrence's final notebook, he wrote that healing happens at the intersection of science and hope. Sophia has both within her reach right now. The words cut through Valentina's carefully constructed rationalization for the Swiss clinic. Her father, the brilliant scientist whose medical legacy she was supposedly protecting, had understood something she had nearly forgotten in her quest for the most advanced treatment. Healing was as much about the heart as it was about the body. Sitting in the private terminal, Valentina found herself remembering a conversation with her father years ago, when she was still in business school and questioning whether she should join his company. The greatest medical breakthroughs didn't come from following established protocols, Lawrence had told her. They came from someone being brave enough to try a different path when the usual roads led nowhere. She looked at her daughter, still clutching the teddy bear and the drawing, and realized with sudden clarity that she was at a crossroads. She could choose the safe, institutional approach, the kind that looked impressive on paper and absolved her of personal responsibility if it failed. Or she could trust the unconventional doctor, who had already shown more progress with Sophia than any expert she had consulted. Griffin's past might be complicated by tragedy, but his present work with Sophia showed an undeniable effectiveness that no amount of Swiss precision could guarantee. With hands that trembled slightly, she took out her phone and made the call that would change everything. Griffin answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting. "Don't leave Boston," she said simply. "We're not going to Switzerland." The door to Lawrence Blackwell's private laboratory hadn't been opened since his death 3 years earlier. Valentina had preserved it exactly as he had left it, partly out of respect and partly because entering the space where her father had spent his final days felt too painful. Now, as she used her key card to unlock the door, the soft hiss of the air circulation system coming back to life seemed to breathe life into Ghost. Griffin stood beside her, his expression solemn with understanding. "I haven't been in here since," she began, not needing to finish the sentence. Griffin nodded. "I remember it well. Lawrence would work here until dawn sometimes, especially when he was close to a breakthrough." The familiarity in his voice reminded Valentina that Griffin had probably spent as many hours in this room with her father as she had. Perhaps more, given the intensity of their research partnership. The laboratory was state-of-the-art, with equipment that would make any research hospital envious. But it was the personal touches that made Valentina's throat tighten. Her father's coffee mug still on the desk, a photo of her and Sophia pinned to a bulletin board, a half-written note in his distinctive handwriting. For a moment, the grief she had efficiently managed for 3 years threatened to overwhelm her. Griffin seemed to sense this, giving her space while he quietly examined the lab setup, his eyes taking in the familiar environment with a mixture of nostalgia and professional assessment. She crossed to the main computer terminal and entered her override code. "Everything my father was working on is still here," she said, stepping aside to let Griffin access the system. "Complete what he started." The words were simple, but carried the weight of a profound trust, not just in Griffin's medical abilities, but in his connection to her father's vision. It was an acknowledgement that sometimes the most valuable scientific contributions came not from institutional consensus, but from the brilliant minds willing to venture beyond established boundaries. Over the next 3 weeks, Griffin worked tirelessly in Lawrence's lab, collaborating with a small team of trusted Blackwell researchers who were sworn to secrecy about the project. Reed Hamilton had been pointedly excluded from this inner circle, a decision that Valentina knew would have political repercussions within the company, but felt necessary to protect the integrity of the work. The neural regeneration protocol they'd developed combined elements of Lawrence's original research with Griffin's refinements and some surprising insights from the notebooks that neither of them had fully appreciated before. "It's like having conversations with Lawrence again," Griffin commented one evening as they decoded a particularly cryptic passage in the research notes. He always wrote assuming the reader already understood half of what he was thinking. Valentina smiled, recognizing the accurate description of her father's communication style in all aspects of his life. These moments of shared understanding about Lawrence created an unexpected bridge between them, a connection forged through their mutual appreciation of a brilliant mind they had both loved in different ways. Sophia and Lily became regular visitors to the lab, with Lily taking her role as junior medical assistant very seriously. She kept a small notebook where she dutifully recorded Sophia's progress in childish handwriting. Sophia wiggled 3 toes today, and Sophia's legs got the tingles, which Daddy says is good news. What had begun as a doctor-patient relationship had blossomed into a genuine friendship between the girls, with Sophia's medical journey becoming a shared adventure rather than an isolated struggle. Valentina found herself spending more time in the lab than in her CEO office, fascinated by the work unfolding before her eyes. For the first time, she began to understand the scientific brilliance that had driven her father's career, not just as an abstract concept, but as a tangible process of discovery and innovation that she could witness firsthand. She began to understand for the first time the brilliance of her father's vision and how Griffin had been the perfect partner to bring it to fruition. Lawrence had been the theoretical genius, the big-picture thinker who could conceptualize entirely new approaches to neural medicine. Griffin, she now saw, was the practical implementer, the surgeon with the rare ability to translate theoretical concepts into workable treatments. Together, they had formed a complementary team that neither could have replicated alone. One evening, as they reviewed the latest test results showing promising neural activity in Sophia's lower spine, Valentina realized something had fundamentally shifted between them. Griffin was no longer just her daughter's doctor or her father's protege. He had become a partner in this journey, someone whose mind she respected and whose compassion she admired. When their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same data tablet, neither pulled away immediately. The brief contact carried an awareness that went beyond professional collaboration, a recognition of shared purpose and growing personal connection. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on Sophia when I almost did." Griffin's reply was equally quiet. "Lawrence once told me that the Blackwells don't give up, they just occasionally take detours before finding the right path." The gentle teasing in his voice made Valentina smile, recognizing her father's wry humor in the observation. The night before Sophia's major treatment procedure, Valentina found Griffin still working in the lab, running final simulations. She brought him coffee and sat beside him, both of them watching the neural mapping patterns on the screen. "I trust you," she said simply, "not because my father did, but because I've seen how you and Lily have brought hope back to Sophia." 3 months after Griffin Hayes walked into their lives, Sophia Blackwell took her first steps. They were small, tentative movements supported by the specialized walking frame Griffin had designed, but they were unmistakably steps, her brain successfully communicating with muscles that had been silent since the accident. The small audience in the physical therapy room, Valentina, Griffin, Lily, and 2 Blackwell researchers, erupted in applause. Lily jumped up and down, chanting, "You did it! You did it!" while Valentina found herself unable to speak through her tears. Griffin maintained his professional composure, carefully monitoring Sophia's movements and vital signs, but the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. "Remember," he told Sophia gently, "this is just the beginning. Your brain is relearning how to talk to your legs. It's going to take time and lots of practice." Sophia nodded solemnly, then broke into a wide grin. "Can Lily help me practice? She's a really good doctor." That evening, Valentina hosted a small celebration dinner at her home, the first time Griffin and Lily had been invited into her personal space as guests rather than medical providers. The ease with which they fit into her world surprised her. Lily exploring Sophia's room with delighted exclamations over each new discovery. Griffin admiring the architectural details of the historic Beacon Hill townhouse with genuine appreciation, rather than the calculated assessment she was used to seeing from business associates. As the children played in Sophia's room upstairs, Valentina and Griffin sat on the terrace overlooking the Boston skyline, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled around them. "We're establishing the Lawrence Blackwell Foundation," she announced, sipping her wine, "focused on pediatric neural regeneration research and treatment. I want you to be the medical director." Griffin looked surprised. What about my reputation, the controversy? The question was valid. He had spent 3 years living with the professional shadow cast by Emily's death and the subsequent lawsuit. Despite his vindication in court, the medical community had a long memory for controversy. Valentina smiled, the confidence of a CEO who had navigated countless corporate challenges evident in her expression. "I think saving the CEO's daughter is quite an effective repetition rehabilitation. Besides, the medical board reviewed your wife's case last week and formally cleared your name. It seems my father had left detailed notes supporting your treatment approach." She hadn't told him about the behind-the-scenes work she had done, leveraging her considerable influence to ensure a fair reassessment of the case that had driven him from Boston. "Your work with Sophia deserves to reach other children. The foundation will give you the platform and resources to do that. Some stories end with dramatic declarations or life-changing moments, but real healing of bodies, hearts, and families happens in the quiet spaces between the dramatic peaks. It happens in a little girl's toe wiggling for the first time in months. It happens in a CEO learning to trust someone who arrived unexpectedly in worn clothes but carried her father's scientific legacy. It happens in a doctor finding redemption for a past he couldn't change through a future he could help create. And it happens in a child like Lily, who saw no difference between healing stuffed animals and helping a real friend walk again. 1 year after their first meeting, Sophia walked, unassisted, onto the stage at the Blackwell Foundation's inaugural gala, her steps steady and sure as she introduced my heroes, Dr. Griffin and Dr. Lily. From the audience, Valentina watched, her heart full with the knowledge that, sometimes, healing begins with the simplest of offerings. Let me help her.